Welcome to Trial Lawyer Prep. What if you could hang out with trial lawyers and jury consultants? Ask them about connecting with clients and juries more effectively. Then take strategies, tactics, and insights to increase your success. Each week, Elizabeth Larrick takes an in-depth look at how to regain touch with the everyday world, understand the emotional burden of your clients and juries, and use focus groups in this process. Elizabeth is an experienced trial lawyer, consultant, and founder of Larrick Law Firm in Austin, Texas. Her goal is to help you connect with juries and clients in order to improve your abilities in the courtroom. Now, here's Elizabeth.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast, Trial Lawyer Prep, with me, your host, Elizabeth Larrick. And welcome to the podcast, our lovely guest, Annie Gough. Hello, Annie.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you for having me on again.
Again, because you are amazing. Yay!
Oh, thank you.
Of course. Well, so here's the deal. Annie and I have had lots of conversations since the last time she came on. And one of the things that I always get asked when getting ready for trial or case preparation or looking at cases or even doing focus groups is about animations and about illustrations and really how to visually present your case. And I know I always had lots of questions when I was gearing up for trial. What's the best? And I always had a lot of assumptions because of my experience that it was really expensive to do animation. So I thought, who better to come talk to all of us about this than my good friend Annie. So Annie, you got to come back on the podcast and help us out because we want to know what is the difference between illustration and animation. So she's going to be here to talk to us all things. And that's because you have experience in both. So tell us a little about kind of your background. Because again, before we had you come in, you're certified medical illustrator. We totally know you do that fantastic stuff. By the way, since Annie and I have worked together, I've gotten to see her work. We've even focus grouped it. And I got to tell you, very good stuff. So we'll do how to contact Annie. All of her information will be in the show notes. But tell us about your experience with animations.
Thank you. Yes. So I've been a medical illustrator since 2001. And since then, I have been involved in tons of animations, especially because I started work at Frank Branson's office in Dallas, where I think he was one of the first lawyers that started actually videotaping his own actors and reconstructing his own traumatic scenes. So he would request animations a lot. There's a difference between 2D, which is two-dimensional, not 2D, which I do have experience doing. And there's 3D animation, which requires a different skill set in 3D animation software. And I have worked with a ton of 3D animators, not only like crash reconstructionists, but medical illustrators that also do 3D work. So yes, I have worked extensively and incorporated a lot of animations into many of my cases.
Awesome. I should also point out, and I got really excited because I'm glad that Annie is here, that we are going to put this particular episode on YouTube. So we're recording the video because Annie's going to be showing us a lot of actual visuals, differences. So there's actually a PowerPoint that goes along with this podcast. So I'm really going to encourage everybody to go watch it. The link will be in the show notes, as well as I'll probably put the link also on LinkedIn. So just so you know, she just gave us a quick visual and I forgot to tell you guys, we're doing this also. The video will be on YouTube. So, okay. So you've done lots of animations as far as like casework goes. So lots of experience with that. So let's just get right to it because as a lawyer, my lawyer brain, the experience that I've had in working with Mr. Keenan and other people is really, really expensive. And the front end, it's a very big expense. And then if they don't do it the way that you were thinking about, because maybe you're not really clear, then it's really expensive to make edits. So kind of walk us through, you talked about 2D, 3D animation, kind of walk us through, if you can, the differences. And I know you've got a visual aid as well. So whenever you want to cue up that PowerPoint, please do so.
I did. I brought some examples, but like in short, a 3D animation is going to be 3D models like airplanes crashing in the sky. This can be very expensive or it can be done simply. It depends a little bit on whether it's just a demonstrative aid to tell a story or if it's demonstrative evidence and every single thing matches the record perfectly. And then in 2D animation, you might be able to illustrate like a baby in a uterus in a birth trauma case, and you show the uterine wall contracted, and then you do the same drawing with the uterus wall not contracted, and you can just make it look like the uterus is contracting in a birth trauma case. So, and that can be cheap or it can be expensive, and it really depends on how you're going to use it in your case. So I will show some samples. And for those of you that are just listening, if I say 2D a lot, I mean 2-dimensional. And 2-dimensional is essentially like drawing on a piece of paper, or I use a tablet. If it's 2-dimensional, I'm literally just drawing on my tablet, just like I would draw on a piece of paper. And then, yeah, I'm going to show some examples of this. I think it will help make more sense.
I'm new to like everybody else listening here. So 3-dimensional is obviously it looks like there's shadows.
3-dimensional. Yeah. It's like the difference between Shrek and Tom and Jerry.
Okay. I love that. Okay. Shrek versus Tom and Jerry. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I am going to share my screen and walk through a couple of these. This is just my information. If anyone wants to take a screen grab of this, my website is here. And I did want to mention that I do have medical animators on my team. Right now, I'm working with Sarah Constantine all the time. She is a medical illustrator. We all go to medical illustration school and take the first 2 years of medical school. Our background is mostly medicine. And then she works primarily in animation, where I work primarily in illustration.
So not to totally sidebar, but so when I hear animation, I think like you're going to hit play and it's going to go, and then
you are correct.
Okay. And so then illustration is just like you're saying, like you draw a leg. It doesn't move.
No,
Okay.
It doesn't, unless you put it in a viewing software as simple as PowerPoint. So, for example,
Gotcha.
Drew a leg, the medial side of a right leg. This is normal. So another thing that I love attorneys to understand is if you start with normal, you have an opportunity to teach the anatomy to the jury and set up the crash that is going to happen. So you can talk about, do you want to use the word femur or do you not want to use the terminology? Do you want to say calf? Do you want to say gastrocnemius? Like, what is the word you want to use? So anyway, this is just a drawing of a normal leg. And then this slide is a drawing of an injured leg. And this drawing matches the x-rays. So in any case where there's radiology, MRI, CT, x-ray, fluoroscopy, ERCP, you name it, if there is black and white proof in the medical record that's visual, I will always do your drawing to match that so you can enter it as evidence. So these would be the x-rays. This would be the 2-dimensional illustration of the injuries, and this would be normal. So if you're an attorney and you want to talk about this crash, whether it's in opening, closing, or with the expert or with a witness, just depending on how fast you go through the slides, it looks like it's animated. So it looks like this leg is getting crushed. So that is an example of a 2-dimensional illustration that looks animated. And that animation, the attorney can control on their own. This gentleman is a similar example. So this is our client. He unfortunately was in a rollover crash with a roof crush. So this is his normal and this is his crash. And these are just 2 slides. And I'm just moving in between these 2 slides and you can see C5 crush in half. And of course it matches his CT. So this would be the CT, the injury, the normal.
While you're doing that, let me court reporter this for people who are listening. She's literally clicking through the slides, but I think like for the first one with the leg, it was a normal leg, then a broken, and then she literally had the x-ray, and that's what we're looking at right now as well. So it's like there's 3 slides, and that last slide actually has the x-ray in the slide. I don't mean to be totally nerding out, but like, how are you putting that x-ray are you putting that down and then drawing on top of it?
Yeah. So I'm opening up all the radiology films. All the radiology scans are saved as they're called DICOM files, which is really weird. But if you work in a lot of catastrophic trauma, you know what a DICOM file is. And that's the way all the radiology scans come from the hospital. And so I put that into a radiology viewing software, and I go through and I choose the best images of all the fractures. I take them, they're now files, and then I put them on a white screen in Photoshop, and I stack them all up so that they're anatomically in position. And then I literally draw over the top to match them exactly.
Gotcha.
So
And you
that's the
can see
drawing.
that for people who are not like, if you've not gone to see the YouTube yet, if you're just listening to this for this episode, like that's what you can actually see is you can see basically the outline of the leg or the outline of the neck. And,
Yeah.
but you can still see the black and white imaging that
Right.
basically lines up.
Yeah. And then if I just delete the x-rays away, then that's like the standard just injury illustration. And from that, where those broken bones are jagged and displaced from one another, I can take my drawing and I can make it into what was the normal leg before that. So you basically put all the pieces back together to show normal. But as an attorney, you would start with the normal and then show this.
Mhm.
So it's the same with the head. You would start with normal and then fracture him. And then that's his CT.
Gotcha. Versus trying to animate, if we were to say, oh, well, I want an animation that is the neck breaking.
Shows it breaking. Well, so you can animate this in that way. So because this is a two-dimensional illustration and there are two drawings, you could put both of these in an animation software and have one fade from one to the other. Or you could even like have the frame flip upside down and you could talk about the car rolling over and then break his neck when the roof crushes. And then you would put that into a movie file that would play in QuickTime. So you could do that. And then as the attorney, all of those visuals would be in one file. And when you wanted to play it, you would just hit play and it would play through. One of the things that you want to think about when you have an animation is this file going to get thrown out? Is opposing counsel going to fight it? Is the judge going to say, no, it's too inflammatory? And then if you lose your animation, do you still have any other visuals? So you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So you're still probably going to want these individual illustrations somewhere in your exhibit list, just in case you lose your animation. And this is one thing that happens. So if you want an animation for your trial, create it way in advance. Get used to working with it, use it with your experts, and show it to opposing counsel and get them used to it early so that they're not going to throw it out. Because if you spend a lot of money making an animation and you walk into trial and the other side is like, whoa, wait, what's this? We haven't seen this. And then they argue it, you're toast. You have no visuals. And really quick, so this actually happened with a series of slides, just these 2D illustrated slides. This man, our client, had a lot of pre-existing back problems. He had previous back surgeries, and then he had our injury, and then he had many, many back surgeries. And so to do all the drawings of what went on in his back, we had 65 slides.
Wow.
Yes. And they took him to court and the other side argued, no, we can't use them. And they fought tooth and nail over every slide, but they ended up keeping 14 slides. And those 14 slides were enough for the jury to see what was going on. And so if they had put all of that into an animation, they would have had no visual at all because it would have been thrown out. So it's something to think about when you're preparing these. And this is another just really quick example before I show an actual animation. So this is a 2D illustration of our client, but this is a 3-dimensional model of a product that is going to explode. So it's still a 2D illustration. We did have a medical animator make the model of this product so that we could show it exploding. But if you look at this and I click to the next slide, do you really need to spend the money to animate the canister exploding when all you really need are the two pieces. And then all of these pieces of the canister are exactly the pieces of the canister that we found at the scene after her injury.
Gotcha. So just behind the scenes here, Annie sent me these, and I thought somebody threw this at her. Like,
Oh,
so
yeah.
my lawyer brain was like, someone threw this at her. So I'm glad that you explained it exploded, but that would be obviously a very, the crux of the whole case would be the explosion of
Right.
the product.
Yeah. So this is a cream whipper that you use when you put cream in your coffee, and it's under a nitrogen pressure canister. And back in the day, they used to make these with a plastic ring, and the plastic would explode. Now they're all made in metal. But at the time that this canister exploded, all of the plastic canisters had been taken off the market in all markets except for the United States. And so through this case, we were able to get the plastic ones also removed in the US.
Wow. That's amazing. I also have to say just really quickly, because you've said this before, but like in our other podcast episode, and it didn't really click with me until I saw some of your work with one of these cases that we were focus grouping. And you make the person like the actual, like
Their likeness.
the leg or the face or whatever, like you make it in their likeness. And I was just like, wow. And they didn't really hit me until I actually saw them. And I was like, oh, this makes it so much more, like you said, like much more connection with the person. It makes it much more realistic to the focus group and the jury we're talking about. But I just want to say, like, if I ever hire you, can you please make me with like 6-pack abs and like, muscles? Like, my question is, can we make requests about bodies?
I actually had a client request some augmentation to her anatomy.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Illustrations. Yeah. It's like, okay. The attorney was like, we better just do it. I was like, all right, here we go.
I mean, that would be like the jury being like, I'm not so sure. But it really makes it so much more realistic, even though it is an animation. I mean, an illustration and a 2D.
Right, but it's custom to the actual person.
Yes.
And that can be really good if they're there in trial, but also if they're not present in trial, so that it's still like a real person.
Yeah.
And if you have any photographs from the family, or if the person's passed away, it's really nice to have that likeness in everything.
Right. And also, I mean, from a preparation standpoint, I think that because jurors have so much time to sit and critique, they critique what you're wearing, they critique what pen you're using, they critique, like, did you get binders or did you not? Like, and there's always this constant comparison. And so if you've got an illustration with like a guy with 6-pack and like big shoulders, and then you've got an average size person, they're gonna be like, wait a second, like,
yeah,
you just went and pulled something off the internet. So also it does, like, those tiny little details are things that really, whether they consciously or subconsciously do it, like, it definitely makes a difference.
It does. It's an excellent point about using stock illustration that is just of a generic male or generic female. If it doesn't look anything like your client, it looks like you just stole it off the internet. It really does. Like the Ken Barbie doll versus who your person really is.
Yeah.
So
The average person, I mean, does not look like that. No
the
offense.
jury,
No
the jury
offense.
sees through that. Yeah, for sure. So I am going to share my screen again. What I'm going to bring up here is I'm going to bring up a 3D animation where everything in the animation is modeled. So it happens in a 3D software. The man is a 3D object. The car is a 3D object. Like, I feel like this is what the typical attorney thinks when they think, oh, I want to animate this. So this is a 3D animation of a very unusual incident that is definitely easier to describe as a motion animation than with words. So let me come back up to my screen. I'm going to get out of PowerPoint and I want to show you this scene. So this is a typical 3D animation. So the car pulls up to the railroad crossing. I can narrate this since some of you are just listening. So the railroad crossing bar is down, but then it goes up and there's no train, and the railroad bar crossing ends up coming down on his car. So he has to get out of his car to push the bar up and off. And because this is a malfunctioning railroad crossing, it does come down on him and hits him in the head. And he suffers a neck injury. Well, it lacerates the top of his head, but he does experience a neck injury from this. And this is a great example of a typical 3D animation with people and a scenario and a vehicle and things happening. This was a very successful animation because it's a weird story of how he got injured. And it's just kind of like, really? Does that really happen? But if you see it like a movie, the jury's like, oh, I can imagine that happening. And they've seen it happen. So now they understand the story. The attorney was able to reinforce this story with lots of witnesses that live in this area that also struggle with this same railroad crossing. And really, I'm going to go through these slides really quick, but kind of like I was talking about, there was a set of illustrations that was 65 slides. This is a lot of slides, but you go through them really quickly. So this is the man that got hit in the head with the railroad crossing. And you can see here on the lateral, he's got a neck injury. He's got a laceration to his head. It matches his MRI. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see that there's a surgical incision. We're going to do his surgery where the green drape is. I'm just going to go through these really quick. So these are just 2D illustrations, but it kind of looks like animation because we're going to go through each step of his surgery. So the discs are removed, the end plates are prepped, the replacement cages go in, and the plate goes on. And you can see if you go through these really quick, it's kind of like animation. So if you're the attorney telling the story, let's say in opening or closing or whatever, you can go through this quickly. But if you have your expert on the stand, you might want to go slower and you might want to stop here and be like, okay, so what is a vertebral disc replacement? And what does this look like? And why do you do this? And you can let the medical expert talk more in depth about what's going on. And of course, it matches the x-ray.
Right. And I can also see, because you talked about like getting the slides in early. And I could see if you were trying to do an animation of the surgery, which I've seen many of, this is a cervical
ACD,
disc, replacement with hardware cage. I could see where if you were trying to get your medical expert or your treating physician or surgeon to say, okay, I want you to go through this animation and say, like, there would be probably lots of red flags that they wouldn't feel comfortable with. Plus, you'd have to stop and go versus if you do it like this, they can see each slide. It gives enough room for them to be like, okay, that's a spacer and this is what it's made of. And, but it's not like super specific. So if they need to have a little wiggle room in describing it, like it wouldn't be difficult for them to do. And like you said, boom, it's done. It's in, they're relying on it or they've walked you through. So there's not really going to be any objection with them. Or if they want to make changes to it, you can do that very quickly before deposition to get these things in there.
Exactly. Your point exactly. Okay. I'm going to start a different case. I want to talk about, this is still an injury case, still a 2D illustration, but I'm going to go more into 3D models. So this client, she did not pass away, but I have a black box on her face because she didn't give permission to show her likeness. But again, you always want to do a custom illustration so you can see your client. And this is her skull next to it. And I'm just going to click to the next slide and you will see her catastrophic skull fractures. And if you go back and forth, you can watch, especially if you watch her upper teeth on the right, you can see how her hard palate is crushed. And you can just go back and forth. And the more you look at it, the more you can watch the septum of the nose break. She has a brain bleed. Her jaw breaks. But
eye socket, yeah.
Yeah, very extensive skull fractures. And this is her CT. Now, this CT is really junky. It's hard to see. So this is something also to remember. Whatever data you have, if you have a really bad CT, if you have a junky CT, you're going to get a junky model out of it. If you have a really good CT, you're going to get a really good model out of it. That's why you want to have an experienced medical animator always, because you want them to be able to work with even a junky CT and create a beautiful model that is anatomically correct. So this is the 3D model.
Let me
that
just stop you real fast because I want to
works.
ask, because again, my lawyer brain says, are most animators not medical
Mm,
illustrators? So,
you might want to
because,
ask.
well, here's why I'm asking, because the way you described it and was basically if you have a crummy or an unclear, or you called it a junky CT, which if you're listening to this, I mean,
If
it,
you
it
have
looked
poor
like
data,
it was from a scary movie, what she just showed us. Like it could jump out of the screen and scare you, but obviously this is someone's actual medical CT, but it's just not very well done. But what you're saying is if you have somebody that has a medical background, they're going to know and be able to kind of piece that back together to create a better model or an illustration versus if you just hire an animator who's just graphic design and they just throw it in there.
right.
Okay.
So there are plenty of people that make beautiful models and that create animations, but they're not medical or scientific or anatomical. So if you're just working with an animator that crashes cars, chances are they're not going to be completely anatomically correct when they crash a skull. But if you have a medical illustrator that has a background in animation, a medical animator, they're going to be able to understand not only the radiology scans, but how that data transfers actually anatomically into your client to make it accurate. So, yeah, it's just a question you can ask before you work with your animator. If it's purely medical, you can ask them what their medical background is.
Right. And that also helps because, again, if you're going to have to pass this off to get it admitted, either through an expert, which is
Mhm.
generally the way you would do it, you don't want to create something that is not going to be admitted, or your expert says, I can't even remotely begin to endorse this because it's not anatomically correct.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
So, this is the 3D model that's made, and you can just see it here on the screen. And what you can do with this model is you can animate it. So let me go to the animation. And so this is that same model that you see placed in a 3D software. So you can see how you can pull the pieces apart. You can take the craniotomy off. You can see the internal bleed. You can rotate the skull, take the jaw off, see the hard palate fracture. Here, let's look at that one more time. So it's the skull, it's just the model of the fractured skull with the pieces exploding, coming apart, coming back together, moving around. The jawbone is removed so that you can see different angles of the skull. But that would be a 3D animation where you would have this file and you would just hit play. And then the other thing that you can do with that same 3D model is you can take that file and you can 3D print it. So this is where we've taken that exact same model that you've become accustomed to. We have placed the file correctly into a 3D printer, and this is what it comes out like. So these are all the pieces of plastic of all the individual pieces of skull. And when they come out of the machine, there's scaffolding, and all that has to be removed and cleaned up. This is the jaw. This is the large piece of the skull. And you can tell we did go ahead and cut the craniotomy in the skull so we can take that skull flap off and show her brain bleed underneath and the compression of the brain inside her skull. This was really cool. With the top of the skull flap and the brain, we were able to squish them together with silicone in the middle and actually make the exact size of the subdural bleed.
Oh,
So the
wow.
subdural bleed is also removable, and it's just a silicone piece of plastic, a little rubbery piece of plastic.
Huh.
And then I take all the pieces home and I paint them. And then we put them all together. These are all the pieces that I'm painting. We did paint her 2 teeth. And I had the attorney, I was like, this is a great idea. Keep these teeth in your pocket. In trial with the jury, when you start talking about her and how she was found at the scene, and I'm pretty sure she went by helicopter to the hospital. They found her 2 front teeth in her stomach
Oh,
when they
my
were doing
gosh.
CTs and X-rays of her body. Yeah, so I was like, just put them in your pocket, and then when you talk about her teeth, you can pull out the teeth and hand them to the jury box. And we did try eyes because
It's awesome.
she did have an eye injury, but we decided this was just way too creepy. We were not going to pass this skull around to the jurors with eyes in it. So the eyes did not make it. And
Yeah,
this
it
was,
looks like from the movie Back to Mars or whatever. Mars
yeah,
people
it's
do. Yeah.
bad. Eyes are so bad without eyelids. And so this was the final 3D model. And you can see how that skull flap comes off and the bleed is underneath. And then the bottom jaw is actually just like this one. This is a different case, but the jaw comes off. And so I learned a little trick. You can attach the jaw with magnets.
Oh, nice.
So you can put the jaw on, or you can take the jaw off, and then you can look inside and see the other fractures. So that's what we have here. You can see with the jaw removed, you can see that hard palate fracture. I mean, her upper jaw was just smashed. Here, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I have one more case to present.
Nice. That's a lot. I mean,
Mhm.
for a 3D model with your experience, how often are you doing a 3D model? I mean, are these things that are just really, we're going to trial, this is an unusual injury? Like, how often are you doing 3D models?
I probably only do 2 or 3 a year. And sometimes we do them for mediation because they're really fun to set in the middle of the conference table during mediation and talk about what happened. But you want a 3D model definitely when you want the jury to touch something or when you want to see something in like a lot of angles, where if you do the 3D model and you put it in an animation file, you don't have control over which way you rotate that model. You just set it up in advance. You create the file is set. The rotation is what it's set to, whatever the animator and you choose. But like, let's say like in the animation that I showed, we rotated around the skull and then we moved it, but then the expert, and then you pause it and the expert goes, oh, well, can you just move it a little bit this direction? Well, you can't. It's just part of the animation file. But if you have the skull in your hands, and your medical expert is holding on to it, they can show this any way they want. They can point to anything. So it just kind of depends on the facts of the case, whether a case would warrant something like that or not.
Yeah. Are you seeing, because with a lot of attorneys do a lot of the same cases, they're seeing a lot of common injuries, I should say, like to the spine. Are you seeing any requests, or is there any need, or if there's not a need, can we create the solution, which would be like a spine that can be taken apart, or just the lumbar spine? Like a lot of people just have the full skeleton, right? And that's cool. But I think sometimes having the spine, the bones with
The disc
actual,
and it
yeah, with the
push
squishy,
out.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
are you
there's a
seeing that?
couple.
Like, can you create
Mhm.
one of those, like just to have, like,
Yes. So there are some like stock ones that you can just order from an anatomical company that will have various, just like a standard lumbar spine. And some of the discs will be desiccated or dry. Some of them will be bulging. Some of them will be herniated, and you can squish them and they go bloop, bloop, like little balloons. So yes, those do exist. We can find them. And if we can't find them, we can make them. But it's always better to just print it from your client's CT. So if you have a good CT of their spine, you might as well make their spine. And then there's no danger of it getting thrown out because it's just a stock. Well, you can't
sure.
prove that this is a man or a woman or a child or an adult. Well, yeah, because this was printed directly from the client's CT. And then you just have the expert back that up. And then whatever you're showing is exactly what you have. I did do a lumbar spine once for a client here in Denver, and it was so unusual. The disc bulge was so big that it looked like that was the spinal cord and the bulge was on the other side, because the spinal cord was so squished and compressed that it was like solid black and it looked like the disc bulge.
Wow.
We did create that so you could see it in all dimensions and then you could pull it apart. And then we did the little laminectomy piece so you could see where they went in to do the surgery. And they ended up cutting the spinal cord instead of cutting a piece of herniated
Oh.
disc. Yeah, it was really ugly.
I'm curious about people who, because these are super cool cases from a lawyer point of view. Everybody always remember we're talking as lawyers in the sense of like unusual and different. And some people may not get a case like that, but they may get a herniation, or they may get an unusual situation with someone's spine, or that would be helpful to have
Yeah.
even a 2D illustration. Or, I mean, when I focus group, I see a ton of ones with like the shots that are that way. And
Yeah, all the injections. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah,
And so
that's always
I'm
good to
curious.
illustrate. Yeah. So I like to illustrate those where you have the back kind of like this, right? And it's just a drawing. And then you do like all the injections from October. And then you add on all the injections from November. And you go through the chronology and you just do them a series of slides, but you add injections on top of like needles plus needles plus needles to show like a voluminous set treatment.
Right. And needles, because people don't like needles.
No, and bring a needle. Have your expert bring a needle to court and talk about how long the needle is and how far it goes in to the skin.
Please make sure you check with security before you do that. Because that would be a very big problem
Yeah.
getting into the courthouse.
Yeah.
Just thinking practically here. Awesome. Okay. So I know, like, as far as like literal, like kind of the differences, and one of the assumptions is like when having dealt with animations, is they're very difficult to change, to make adjustments as compared to doing kind of what you're talking about with the 2D. So walk us through that.
So the 3D model has to be created in 3D software, right? And so then you have that model. Then that model goes on to a stage. The stage needs lighting, whatever the background is, and then you have camera movements. Then you create all those keyframes, and then you have to send that into the render. And then once it goes into render, it could take an hour or 3 days to render to produce that final movie, that QuickTime movie. So if you have a change to the lighting, you change the entire movie, which means you might need another 3 days to render. There's no way to shorten the time of the movie, of what it takes to create whatever animation you've created. But then if the change that you have is to one of the models, then you're going all the way back to the original file. You're changing the 3D model. Then you have to put it back into the scene, and then you have to re-render. So changes, they might not be very difficult to just like, oh, can you just move the tooth? Well, yeah, but everything has to be done. It could take 3 days to make a simple change. And that's why you want to do animations well in advance of trial, get used to working with them, because you can't change something the night before trial in an animation. Maybe, but most likely not, which means whoever your animator is, if you call them the night before trial and you're like, oh, the car's green, it's not blue, they're going to be up all night for probably 48 hours trying to fix that for you. It's not fair. You might accrue a rush charge. All kinds of bad things can happen. So you definitely always do your visual exhibits well in advance. Plus, if you have them before the depositions and you use them in the depositions, they are already exhibits to your case. So they're already demonstrative evidence. The jury can look at them. There's no reason not to do them in advance and have them be part of your case. You don't want to just spring them on somebody the day of trial, because if you're not well prepared to use them, then you've kind of wasted your money.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get your opinion on this. Okay.
Okay.
So what's better for an animation? Medical stuff or like the event itself, like the injury causing event? So
Right.
what's your opinion, Annie?
Ooh, I like to crash cars. I think it's fun to see the actual crash, to understand from a bird's eye view who was where. I feel like crashing vehicles makes sense. It puts the jury at the scene. They've actually seen the crash. And then the surgery in an injury case, I don't think ever needs to be animated. It's very expensive, and animating a surgery can be done with 2D illustrations. But if we're talking medical malpractice and the surgery is really complex and the anatomy is really complex, and we're talking about how long it took to do something or how something was situated behind something, where you like need to rotate or you need to talk about time, then you might want to animate that surgery so that you can see it in different angles as opposed to just a flat drawing. And I have an example of that.
Let's see it.
Okay. All right. This is a liver case. I'm just going to start with that. This is a 2D illustration. And we're going to take off the rib cage and we're going to zoom into the liver. These are just 2D illustrated slides. This is all the hepatic system. Hepatic means liver. So the hepatic system is all the vessels, and it's the inner workings of the liver and how it creates bile, which is a digestive enzyme that breaks down fat, which it's all about. Like, bile is stored in the gallbladder. When you eat really fatty foods, the gallbladder squishes out the bile and it helps you digest and all these things. It also has arterial supply. So there are hepatic arteries that come off the aorta that supply the liver.
Blood,
And
blood.
yes, blood, oxygen. And then there is also the portal system, which are the veins that take everything out from not only your intestines and help you digest food, but also takes blood back to the heart. So anyway, this is anatomy, just very straightforward anatomy with 2D illustration. And you can see what we've done is this is our client's condition. So her gallbladder has been removed. She has an arterial pump for chemotherapy. And you can see these 2 yellow dots are liver tumors. And so if we fade the anatomy away, you can see the tumors back there. And so I'm going to show you what we illustrated in this case. So this is just an illustration of the anatomy, but you can see how being able to rotate the liver is helpful. So now I've rotated to the back of the liver, and you can see where those tumors are. We go by the side. We look underneath the bottom of the liver. Is it helpful or is it too complex? This is something that you might want to think about as an attorney. Is this animation beneficial for showing where these tumors are?
Okay. My lawyer brain's like, I want to answer that question.
Yes. What is your answer?
I think it just depends on what ends up happening to her. Because if the position of the tumors doesn't have anything to do with, then it's not a big deal. But I liked you doing all that just because, I mean, truthfully, I think most people, and I'll put myself in this, like, we don't know how big our organs are. Like, we don't know how big our livers are, or we know where things kind of are in our bodies. But I like the idea of it's like just showing, like, this is a really big organ and it's really important to us as human beings.
Liver
But
is big.
I just like that, yeah, how big you showed it was. Because even if this is just a 2D animation and I'm not actually touching it, like, I still got a good impression that this is a really big organ.
Good. Okay. Fantastic. Now we're going to talk. No, that's a great answer. And it's important because the jury has no idea either
No.
how big their liver is or how significant it is. What we really wanted to express was how close the tumors are to the critical structures.
Oh,
To
well,
the
I missed
veins,
that.
the arteries. Exactly. But anyway, now we're going to talk about what happened to her. So the surgeon in question.
And we're back to 2D, by the way. We're back, like, she
Yes.
showed us the animation. Now we're back with the
Yes.
regular
So we're
slide.
back
Sorry.
to 2D. So this entire case was done in 2D slides and animations. There was both available throughout the trial. So what happened was the tumors line up to the PET scan. And then when they did the treatment of these tumors, everything is axial. So all of a sudden you've gone from everything looking like our client, the patient is standing up, and now everything's going to be axial because she's in a CT machine.
Laying
Right.
down. She's
Mhm.
laying down.
Her feet are closest to the viewer, and you are looking up the nose. That's how you best describe a CT or MRI positioning. So you understand why right is left and left is right.
Gotcha.
So basically, we're looking up into her liver, and these probes come in from the outside, and they're going to ablate with microwave ablation. They're going to basically burn her tumors. So these are just 2-dimensional slides from her intraoperative ablation in the machine. And I'm just clicking through these slides, but it looks like the probes are moving.
Yeah.
And you can see how many probes there are.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow. Once we put this together, we're like, wow, they microwave ablationed her a lot. And so this is obviously, medical malpractice is always much more complex than just an injury. So these are 2-dimensional slides breaking down how long they use the ablation probe on each tumor. So I'm just going to click through these really quick. We used a clock because it's important to talk about which probes were in for how long. So we have 57 minutes of ablation.
Wow.
Yeah. So here, let's try it on this one. Is this one better as an animation? So we're going to actually show the timing of the ablation. Obviously, it's faster than 57 minutes.
Thank you.
Yes.
This podcast is not supposed to last that long.
No, but see, the clocks are moving.
Yeah.
The ablation, you can actually zoom into the tumor. You can see the changes in the liver. It's matching all of the fluoroscopy radiology images, which is evidence in the case. So this is able to be approved of, created with the expert. So the testifying expert was with us all along in the creation of this animation. And this was able to be introduced as evidence. And so what we're watching is we're watching these probes come into the liver and burn the tumors.
Just destroy it. You're just destroying the liver. That's what we're supposed to be seeing, right?
Yes. The amount of ablation that happened in this case is absolutely obscene, completely negligent, not the standard of care. These probes, the ablation, I think, is supposed to be a maximum of 10 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
And they used 4 probes for 57 minutes.
Wow.
Yes. And this animation was critical in the jury understanding what they did to this patient.
Sure.
And if I recall correctly, her liver completely shut down.
No.
The hepatic arteries started bleeding, the portal vein completely clotted off, and I think she passed away while she was on the liver transplant list.
Oh,
Yeah,
Annie.
I know.
That's a very cool animation because while it's showing you the probe is like lighting things up and it's like yellow and red, like the liver is turning black, which is like pretty cool. So that would make sense as far as like, because I think medical malpractice and like showing people what went wrong is, oh my gosh, I think that would help medical malpractice like tenfold because those are the hardest trials, like hands down. Like if you're doing med mal, like anybody else can try and come to me like, well, this is so hard. I'm like, ha 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 ha. No, statistically speaking, like med mal trials are the hardest. So yeah, so that's definitely like what a good. And I've seen one of those thermal cases before, and it's just like it blows me away. I'm like, wow, shouldn't be using them on people just yet. I mean, because this is a whole other case that the ones that I've had experience with, where I'm just like, wow, how is this even like? Should we really be allowing people to use these things on our bodies? I don't know. That's probably a whole different podcast. All right, so
yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say the mediation for this case, we use like a bag of microwave popcorn to show how if you use the right timing, you make popcorn. But if you go in even 30 minutes or 30 seconds too long, everything's fried and black. So burned popcorn was part of the case. It's always fun to use analogies of things that people do every day.
Well, yeah, and someone's definitely burned the popcorn, and it definitely has a very distinct smell. So it's like,
oh yeah, yeah, you're throwing that out.
That's right.
That liver is coming out.
That liver's going. That's right. Awesome. Okay, so let's do a little summary because, and again, if you're listening to this, I really encourage you to go watch the YouTube so you can actually see all of the visuals that Annie has shared with us today. So animation, showing things that are complicated, that are hard to describe, easier to picture. Illustrations, though, can become 2D with movement. And those are quick, much quicker, much faster to produce. Typically. Right. Typically. Is there anything we're missing? If people are sitting there thinking, well, so what's better, animation or 2D illustration?
It totally depends on your case. A lot of people ask me, well, how much does it cost to have medical illustration? I'm like, well, that depends on a million different things. Do you have good radiology files? Do you have bad radiology files? What kind of anatomy are we talking about? Like, are you able to tell the story from one view? Or are we going to have to show it from the front and the side? Because then you have 2 sets of illustrations. Is it a car crash? Is it medical malpractice? Is it a broken ankle, or is it a brain surgery or an aneurysm in a complicated part of the brain? Like, so ranging from simple to complex is the whole gamut. And that's why it's best to just call and be like, this is what happened to my client. What do you think we want to show? I was just talking to someone about a case with a retained sponge. Like, do we want to do a 3D print of the size of the wound and then actually take one of the sponges and stuff it in there to see size comparison? Or do we want to draw that? Or do we want to animate that? A lot of times you just want to sit and brainstorm it and talk it through, talk about budget, talk about timing. Do we have 30 days or do we have 6 months? Preferably, we want 6 months because we want to make sure we have the right expert and we want to make sure that they're on board. And then we want to use it in their deposition so that then you are totally prepared to use it for the jury in teaching the story. So it all varies. Like even just the anterior cervical discectomy, it depends on, have they had a prior surgery? Have they had prior injuries? Sometimes have an attorney call me and say, hey, I just have an ACD. Can you illustrate this for me? Yeah, sure. Please send me some photographs of your client so I can make it look like them. And then send me the DICOM files, the radiology scans. And they already have hardware all over their neck. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Now we have to pull all the medical records from the beginning. Like, when did they start as normal? How many surgeries have they had? Then what happened in the crash? Then what happens now? Otherwise, the other side is going to be like, it's all pre-existing. So it all varies.
Which they say no matter what we do. So
yeah, it was already there. Nothing was bleeding.
So you can help people, like, in just talking with somebody, like with your experience and like thinking through all that stuff and brainstorming, like you said, like you can be able to say, hey, I would suggest just doing 2D, or I would suggest this is a case that you could do not only a 3D model, but also do an animation.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Because I think sometimes that's so helpful because we see things often and frequent. And so it makes it difficult sometimes for us to know, oh, yeah, this is just a simple laminectomy, no big deal, Annie. And you're like, well, wait, let's slow down just a second and think about it a different way. And that's why I think having an outside perspective is always helpful, no matter what you're doing, because you're going to have a different point of view and bring in your experience and be able to say, hey, Elizabeth, that's not going to work really well with your particular client. And here's how come. Or you're going to be able to say, that sounds super complicated. Have you thought about doing an animation? Because I'm lost.
Yeah. If timing is important or if movement is important, you want to have timing or movement. You want to animate. But like sometimes you don't need that. Sometimes educating the jury, simple is best. And the more clear you can be with your story, the more they're going to understand your story. So the more exact you can be. It's just like they say, you only want one theme. You don't want 5 themes. You want one theme. And you want to be able to tell your story to a 4th grader as easily as possible. So adding a million slides in an animation might not help clarify things. It might make things more complex. So you really need to sit down and do each one case by case, figure out how to best tell that story.
Yeah. And we love to complicate things. And by we, I mean lawyers. Oh my gosh, we love details. We love them. And we think every one of them has their own special place in the case, getting outside help. So, okay. So Annie, if somebody wants to see more of your work, of course, they're going to watch this lovely YouTube we're putting together. But if they want to see more of your work, they want to learn more about you, where should they go? What should they do?
They can go to the website, which is injuryillustrated.com, which is the same name as my book, Injury Illustrated. There's tons of stuff in the book, and there are lots of examples on the website. And I will admit, I'm not perfect about it, but if you want more up-to-date illustrations, I do add a lot to my Instagram page. So you can always follow there for gross and unusual drawings with your social media. So my Instagram is AGCMI for Annie Gough Certified Medical Illustrator.
Yeah. And we'll put all the links in the show notes for anybody who's driving down the road right now and thinking like, I want to see more. But your website is great. You've got tons of examples there, and they can reach out to you via email or contact you through the website or even send you a DM on Instagram. So thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. This has been something that I wanted us to talk about for a while. So I'm glad you came back.
Yes. Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to see you.
All right. Thank you everybody for listening in today. And don't forget to go check out this video on YouTube.
Yes.
There'll be a link in the show notes. It should be on my YouTube video. And if worst case scenario, we're going to let Annie have a copy of it too and put it on her YouTube as well. So thank you so much. If you had or enjoyed this podcast episode, please rate, review, follow on your favorite podcast platform. And if you really loved it, send a nice review. So, all right. Thank you all. And until next time, thank you.
Thank you so much.